You ever have that one neighbor who just can't respect boundaries? I thought I'd seen it all in our quiet suburban cul-de-sac, barking dogs, leaf blowers at 6 a.m., petty parking wars, but nothing prepared me for Karen. She was the kind of woman who smiled like she was auditioning for a neighborhood commercial, big sunglasses, floral dresses, and a tone that always dripped with fake sweetness. You know the type. When I moved into my house 2 summers ago, the pool was my sanctuary. After a long day, I'd sit by it, watch the water shimmer under the porch lights, and just breathe. It wasn't just a luxury, it was my peace. I worked hard for that home, for that calm, but that peace was short-lived. It started small, little signs that didn't make sense at first. I'd find wet footprints leading away from the pool deck early in the morning, towels that weren't mine draped over the chair, a faint smell of someone else's sunscreen. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd forgotten I'd left a towel there. Maybe raccoons, I don't know. But then I found something that made my stomach drop. A half-empty wine glass on the pool ledge and lipstick on the rim. And it wasn't mine. That was the moment I knew someone had been there, not just once, but comfortably, like they belonged. I decided to check the security camera footage, the ones I'd installed for the front porch, but I'd recently added one near the backyard gate too. And what I saw made my jaw drop. There she was, Karen, in her wide-brim hat floating lazily on an inflatable flamingo, sipping from a wine glass like she owned the place. The footage showed her climbing over my fence with a towel in one hand and a Bluetooth speaker in the other. She was literally having a private spa day in my pool, and the worst part, she wasn't alone. She brought friends, 3 of them, all chatting, laughing, lounging while I was at work. They'd clearly been doing it for a while, too. I could tell from the way they moved around my yard, familiar, relaxed, no hesitation. That night I sat at the edge of the pool, just staring at the reflection of the backyard lights rippling across the water. My anger simmered like the heat trapped in the summer air. How could someone do that? I muttered to myself. You don't just trespass like it's a hotel. But I didn't react right away. I wanted to think. I wanted to make sure whatever I did next wasn't out of blind rage. You ever been in that situation where your heart says, get revenge, but your mind whispers, wait, make it count? That was me that night, so instead of storming over, I came up with a plan, a calm one, a smart one. The next morning, I walked up to Karen's front yard, pretending to be cheerful. She was watering her flowers. Morning, Karen, I said, forcing a smile. Oh, good morning, dear, she chirped. Lovely day for a swim, isn't it? The nerve. I swear my fists clenched on instinct. I nodded, pretending not to notice the smirk tugging at her lips. Yeah, it is. Hope you're keeping cool these days. Oh, I manage, she said almost teasingly. That's when I knew she knew I knew, and she didn't care. She thought I'd do nothing, that I was too polite, too calm, too good neighbor to confront her. She had no idea what was coming. That night, I stayed up late reviewing the footage again. I wanted proof, undeniable evidence. Over the next few days, I collected timestamps, screenshots, and clear video angles. Every single visit she and her friends made, I saved to a folder labeled Pool Trespass. By day 4, I had hours of footage. And then I noticed something chilling. One of her friends, a man I didn't recognize, had started bringing his kids. They were splashing around, unsupervised, jumping off the deck into the deep end. If one of them had got hurt, who would have been responsible? Me. That's when the moral line snapped. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about safety and respect. So I set my plan in motion. I didn't add electricity to the pool right away, oh no. That part came later, but I did something else first. I installed new sensors, motion alarms connected to my phone. Silent, invisible, but deadly effective. The next time she trespassed, I'd know the exact second it happened. And believe me, it didn't take long. The next afternoon, I got the alert. Motion detected, backyard gate. My pulse raced. I opened the live feed, and there she was again, Karen, sunglasses on, holding a wine bottle, the same smug smile. She turned on my music speaker, my playlist, and laughed with her friend as they slipped into the pool. That was the final straw. I didn't go out. I didn't shout. I watched, silent. Because sometimes silence is more powerful than confrontation. I knew karma was about to pay a visit. And I was ready to welcome it with open arms. And what happened next? Let's just say, when she came back the next time, she didn't expect the pool to fight back. Would you have confronted her right away? Or done what I did, let her dig her own grave first? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with a neighbor like this, make sure to subscribe, because the next part of this story is where things start to spark. I'll be honest, for a few sleepless nights, I pictured every revenge fantasy possible. I pictured fireworks, I pictured a viral meltdown, I pictured dramatic confrontations with cameras and shouting and the whole cul-de-sac glued to the spectacle. But this wasn't a movie where you could get away with anything. There were kids involved now. There was liability. There was a real human being on the other side of a very real line. So I made a decision that surprised even me. I would not hurt her. I would not put anyone in danger. Instead, I would create a spectacle so unnerving, so utterly theater, that Karen would be the one who looked criminally ridiculous, while the law and my conscience stayed clean. Call it deterrence with theatrics. Call it poetic justice with a safety net. Either way, I set out to make the pool feel dangerous without making it actually dangerous. I started by telling myself a simple rule: no physical harm, no real electricity tricks, no instructions, and no setup that could lead to injury. That meant no tampering with wiring, no live circuits, and no idea that could read like a how-to for harming someone. I wanted the appearance of danger, the suspense, the panic, the exposure. And the law would take care of the rest once the cops saw my footage. My plan had three parts: evidence, theater, and accountability. Evidence was already stacked: the footage, the timestamps, the kids, the uninvited guests. But evidence alone doesn't always sway people. You could have proof and still be gaslit into misremembering. That's where theater came in. A dramatic, non-harmful setup that forced the trespasser to look and act like what they were, entitled and reckless. So I went shopping. Not for anything illegal, just props. Extra bright floodlights with strobes, fog machine cartridges, the kind used for Halloween, heavy-duty waterproof speakers for a loud, ominous hum loop, and a few warning, electrified pool, do not enter signs that I printed in bold, ridiculous font. I also bought motion-activated sprinklers that blasted from the side, harmless, startling, and humiliating when you're in a bathing suit. I know what you're thinking. It sounds petty. But petty can be powerful when used to protect boundaries. And I'm not proud of wanting to humiliate anyone. I just wanted her to feel the violation she'd been causing. I wanted the community to see it for themselves. The first night I set everything up, I felt like a stagehand in a macabre play. The fog machine sat hidden beneath a decorative planter. The speakers were camouflaged under poolside cushions. The strobe lights were mounted high in the eaves, angled down to make the water look like it was crackling. I put the signs where anyone sneaking through the gate would absolutely see them. Two big neon placards right on the path. The sprinklers I positioned to soak anyone who crossed the deck. Nothing that could cut or electrocute, only sensory assault. Light, sound, water, and a message. I remember lying awake that night listening to the hum of my own plans, feeling equal parts ridiculous and righteous. My hands shook a little when I hit arm on the alarm app. I justified it by thinking of the unsupervised kids, the selfish laughter, the idea that my home was treated like a public resort. If humiliation made Karen think twice, so be it. The bracelet of motion alerts around my house was the thing that let me sleep. I wasn't relying on luck. I had cameras, backup storage, an ironclad timeline. If anything escalated, the police would have everything. That fact calmed me more than anything. Of course, she came back. People like Karen don't give up on free access easily. Around sunset the following weekend, my phone lit up. Motion detected, backyard gate. I watched the live feed, my chest tight with anticipation. There she was, same attire, same smug carriage, and this time she had 3 women and 2 kids. She moved with the easy entitlement of someone who believes there are no consequences. She saw the sign first. She laughed, a little too loud for someone who should have been embarrassed. "Oh, come on," she called toward the others. "It's a joke, he's being dramatic." She stepped onto the deck, and that's when everything hit. The floodlights cycled, throwing harsh white strobe over the water. A low, buzzing hum played from the speakers, designed to mimic the timbre of angry electrical equipment. Fog rolled across the pool in lavender clouds, and the sprinklers, merciless and cold, detonated in a sudden arc, drenching everyone in seconds. For a heartbeat, it was pure chaos. Shrieks, frantic scrambling, a little boy toppling backward off a lounge chair. Karen's laugh turned into a strangled yelp. She backed up, eyes wide, staring at the signs as if someone had finally conjured the invisible line she'd been ignoring. Her friends cursed, and then, in a delightful moment of human truth, they started filming her. The entire scene looked infuriating and pathetic on camera. 3 grown women drenched, hair plastered to faces, Karen wiping fog away from her sunglasses like she was trying to maintain dignity in a circus. I did not go out there. I didn't need to. I watched, muted the audio so I could hear myself breathe, and let the neighborhood watch itself. Within minutes, the front door across the street opened, and a neighbor I'd only ever waved to stuck his head out, flashlight in hand. "What on earth?" he called. Others stepped out in robes, curious and concerned. Someone else, the HOA president of all people, pulled up her car and stared toward my yard, face blank at first and then slowly registering what was happening. You could feel the energy shift. This was no longer a private spectacle. It was a community event. And there on the live feed was Karen, caught between indignation and shock, trying to shout something about harassment while everyone stared. Her composure crumbled into stammering excuses. "It was an emergency, my pipes, we needed to cool off." She sounded smaller than she looked from the camera. Then the phone call came. I saw the number flash, my neighbor, the one who'd always been fair. He said 2 words that made something cold and certain click into place. I called police. The arrival of the police was slow in my mind, but quick on the footage. Blue lights painted the fence slats the color of a storm. Officers stepped out with a measured calm, not the dramatized shouting you see on TV, just quiet competence. They interviewed everyone on the lawn, asked for IDs, took down statements. I sent them my folder, timestamps, full resolution videos, and a little explanation of the setup. Corinne's explanation disintegrated under the weight of that footage. There was the clip of her climbing the fence. There was the clip of the kids unsupervised in deep water. There was the repeated pattern, the dates, the times, the wine glass left to dry on my pool edge. Her face on camera, smug and smiley, was a stark contrast to her desperate, sweaty testimony in front of officers. She tried to blame me for being theatrical. "He set traps," she cried. But the officers were professionals. They asked about trespass, about the kids, about permission. They took notes. They warned her about future trespassing, and quietly they suggested an HOA mediation. It was not the end, not by a long shot, but it was a crack. The community had seen what I'd seen, and my evidence had done what evidence does. It refocused the story away from my supposed overreaction and onto her choices. As the police drove away and neighbors retreated to their lawns to gossip and assess the night's entertainment, I had a twisted, odd sensation. It felt like victory and hollowness at once. Humiliation had worked. The kids were safe. The police had a record, but I also knew this was just the start. Corinne's pride would seek repair, and the HOA would want to mediate. Would I have done it differently if a child had been hurt? Absolutely. Would I have handled it with less theater? Maybe. But watching someone who had trespassed on my safety finally feel exposed felt fair. What would you have done in my position? Confront her. Call the police immediately, or set a non-harmful trap to make your point? Drop your thoughts below. And if you want to see how Corinne tried to claw back her reputation and how the HOA got involved, hit subscribe. Part 3 is when the paperwork, the petty retribution, and the courtroom whispers start to collide. The morning after the police left, the cul-de-sac felt different, like the kind of quiet that follows a thunderstorm, thick with the expectation of more rain. The neighbors were whispering. The HOA Facebook group had already exploded with half-truths, and Corinne? She was nowhere to be seen. For a woman who loved being watched, that absence was loud. I thought the theater and the police would be the climax. I was wrong. This was only intermission. By noon, an official-looking envelope arrived on my porch, stamped with the HOA letterhead. My heart sank. It wasn't addressed to me personally. It was addressed to all residents and included an invite to a mediation meeting. The subject line read, "Pool Trespass Incident Neighborhood Resolution Meeting." The HOA had the delicate chore of balancing a civics manual with furious egos. I read every word twice, then 3 times, like a prayer that might change the outcome. The HOA wanted to maintain community harmony. They wanted us to resolve disputes amicably. Translation: keep the lawn intact, keep the escrow payments rolling, and preferably keep local drama off the HOA meeting minutes. That night the cul-de-sac filed out again, this time in button-down shirts and cardigan sweaters. The HOA clubhouse, tacky with framed watercolor houses and an aroma of powdered coffee, filled up fast. Corinne arrived late, hair frizzed from the sprinklers, cheeks flushed from embarrassment or anger. It was hard to tell which. She wore pearls like armor and a face like a woman rehearsing regret. The HOA president, a woman named Marlene who had become the unofficial referee of our street, called the meeting to order with the kind of polite firmness that makes children sit up straight. "We're here to hear both sides," she said, fingers steepled. "This is about boundaries and trust." I took a breath that felt like the inhale before the plunge. I had my folder with me, printed photos, timestamps, and a small notebook where I'd written down witness statements, the names of neighbors who'd seen or heard something, and the kids' ages. I had the police incident number. I had, in short, everything you assemble when you're trying to prove you weren't being dramatic, you were being careful. Corinne spoke first. Her voice started soft and then got louder, like a radio that wasn't sure if it wanted to break. "I'm sorry if anyone was offended," she said. "I didn't mean to cause alarm. It was a misunderstanding. I have a right to use the neighborhood amenities." She looked around as if searching for allies. Some heads nodded, some fought the urge to roll. Then one of her friends stood up, the woman who'd been filmed laughing in my living room, the same one who'd pulled out her phone that night. She doubled down, claiming my setup was hostile and bullying. Several neighbors murmured agreement. A few glared at her like she'd declared war on decency. The room split into murmurs, the social geography of our little world remapping itself slowly and noisily. When it was my turn, I did not shout. I had learned from watching too many courtroom dramas that calm testimony lands harder than a scream. I told the room what I'd told you, the footage, the recurring trespasses, the kids, the wine glass, the times and dates. I showed them the clips on my laptop, carefully, respectfully, without commentary. You could hear people inhaling. Seeing is a violent thing. It forces reality into the room. A neighbor named Tom, quiet, practical, retired firefighter, stood up. He'd been the one who called the police. "This isn't about embarrassment," he said. "This is about safety. If a kid drowns because nobody felt like they needed to ask permission, that's on the homeowner in the eyes of the law." He looked at Karen like he'd always wanted to look at her, not with envy or resentment, but with clear, skilled concern. That landed like a bell. Mediation is built on language, compromise, shared responsibility, better communication. The HOA proposed a path, a written apology from Karen, a formal promise never to enter private property without permission, and a clause about supervised children. They wanted us to add neutral language about the pool being private property. They also suggested neighborhood watch shifts to make sure disputes didn't escalate. Karen balked. An apology. She scoffed like it was a word too small for the type of person she was. "You want me to admit wrongdoing in front of everyone?" Her pearls flashed under the meeting lights. Her voice carried that fragile indignation women like her wield when they feel privacy has been asked of them. Then, with a turn that surprised everyone, she did something I hadn't expected. She cried. Not the theatrical, quick tears of someone who wants attention, but real, drawn, exhausted tears. "I didn't understand. I just thought," she said, her voice breaking. Whether it was sincere or crafted to salvage dignity, I couldn't say. It complicated how people responded, because even the most furious among us felt a tug of pity. But pity doesn't replace documentation. The HOA asked for written statements and photos to be submitted within 3 business days. I left the meeting with an uneasy gratitude. My point had been made in public, but the resolution felt like a paper bandage over something that had bled for a while. Over the next week, the HOA's inbox filled. Some neighbors sided with me, sending supportive statements and screenshots from their phones. Others sided with Karen, claiming the display was excessive, and that I'd publicly shamed a woman who only tried to be nice. The divide was there, measured in emoji reactions and private messages, and it made my home feel simultaneously supported and lonely. Then came the letter from an attorney. Her attorney, not mine. A formal, courteous note that carried the weight of legal voice. A demand to cease unlawful harassment and a veiled suggestion that I remove my intimidating setup or face action. The language was careful. There were no venomous threats, just the precise, sterile tone of someone who could make disputes expensive. I sat with that letter like a heavy rock in my hands. On the one side was safety and evidence and a community that had seen the truth. On the other side was a formal suggestion that I had maybe gone too far. The HOA council suggested mediation again, this time with lawyers present. The idea of a lawyered-up showdown in a room full of neighbors, with depositions and lip service. It felt like our entire suburb was becoming a stage for a different kind of play, one with subpoenas. I was angry in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be. Not at Karen necessarily, but at the system that lets entitlement ride roughshod over private property until someone pushes back. I wanted the moral victory, yes, but I also wanted clear lines, rules that would prevent this for someone else later. So I did something small and deliberate. I emailed my neighbors a short, calm note. I was not interested in escalation. I wanted boundaries and fairness. I attached a link to the police report and asked people to consider the safety angle. It wasn't grandstanding. It was paperwork, the slow, meticulous kind of justice that wins when it's patient. That night, as I lay awake, I realized something important. Moral justice wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was filing statements, gathering witnesses, and letting the due process of a neighborhood, however flawed, balance the scales. And sometimes it was the faint, quiet hope that people would remember who had chosen empathy and who had chosen entitlement. Would you have hired a lawyer then, or accepted the HOA's mediation and a possible apology? Would you want public spectacle or the slow grind of paperwork? Tell me in the comments, and if you want part 4, where letters turn to threats and the community's patience runs thin, hit subscribe. The courtroom whispers are coming, and Karen's next move is the one that really changed everything. I thought the story would end in that HOA meeting, a few apologies, a signed statement, maybe even an awkward wave across the driveway one day. But if there's one thing I've learned about people like Karen, it's this. When they lose control, they don't accept it, they rebuild it. The day after I received her lawyer's letter, I sat at my kitchen counter staring at the words that had turned my poolside frustration into a potential legal battle. Unlawful harassment, public embarrassment, emotional distress. It was like she'd twisted my defense into an offense. I kept thinking about the absurdity. I had been the one wronged, and yet somehow she was making herself the victim. It's a tactic that works more often than it should. Because when a person cries loud enough, people forget who started the fire. I didn't want a lawsuit. I just wanted peace. But peace, I realized, wasn't coming without a fight. That night, I called a local attorney, a calm, sharp man named Richard who'd handled a dozen HOA disputes before. His first words were blunt. You didn't break any laws, you didn't harm anyone, you documented everything. But Corinne's lawyer is fishing for intimidation. They want you scared enough to fold. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in days. Still, the anxiety crept in, that gnawing feeling that the ground under my home wasn't as stable as I thought. The idea that someone could invade your space, get caught red-handed, and still turn it around on you, that's a special kind of helplessness. Richard suggested I file a civil complaint of my own, trespassing, property misuse, and harassment, not to escalate, but to set a boundary in writing. Once the court sees your footage, he said, no one will buy her victim act. So I did it, not for revenge this time, but for truth. The weeks that followed turned the neighborhood into a rumor factory. I'd catch whispers on my morning walks. People at the mailbox would pause their conversations when I passed. Some sympathized quietly, sliding kind words into my DMs. Others sided with her, convinced I'd overreacted or set her up. The cul-de-sac had become divided between those who respected property lines and those who thought I'd made a spectacle. But the real chaos started when Corinne began her campaign. She posted long rants on the HOA Facebook page, carefully worded but venomous between the lines. Some neighbors think private property gives them the right to bully others, she wrote. Maybe next time someone needs a swim, they'll think twice before being humiliated. She never mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew. Then she printed flyers, actual flyers. Neighborhood safety alert, with a blurry screenshot of my security lights flashing and words like unauthorized traps and public intimidation. She slipped them in mailboxes like propaganda pamphlets. I remember holding one in disbelief. The audacity would have been funny if it hadn't been so exhausting. That's when I realized something deep. She wasn't fighting for justice, she was fighting for narrative control. She wanted to rewrite what happened, and I wasn't going to let her. The first court hearing was scheduled on a rainy Thursday morning. Small claims, civil dispute, no jury, just a judge in a quiet municipal courtroom that smelled faintly of paper and anxiety. Corinne walked in wearing a cream blazer and that same smirk she'd worn the first time I caught her trespassing. Her lawyer, a younger man with too much confidence and too shiny of a tie, whispered to her like they were planning a performance. Richard sat beside me, calm and composed. "Stay quiet," he murmured. "Your evidence speaks louder than any argument." When the hearing began, her lawyer painted a picture so distorted it almost made me laugh. According to him, Corinne was a community volunteer who'd mistakenly believed the pool was part of the shared property. He called my setup psychological intimidation. Then he showed photos, the floodlights, the fog, the warning signs, stripped of context to make me look like a villain. "This," he said, "is excessive force for a minor misunderstanding." For a moment, I felt the heat rise in my chest. But Richard just slid the USB drive across the table and said, "Your Honor, may we show the footage?" The courtroom went quiet as the monitor flickered on. There was Corinne climbing over the fence, laughing, pouring wine, kids jumping in unattended, repeated visits, timestamps, voices, faces. Every new clip felt like a heartbeat. And then the night of the shock show, her stepping through the gate despite clear "do not enter" signs. The sprinklers going off, the fog rolling in, her friends screaming and neighbors gathering. You could hear laughter from the back of the courtroom, muffled but unmistakable. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. Even Corinne's lawyer looked at her like he'd just realized she'd given him a sinking ship to defend. Richard spoke softly, deliberately. No one was harmed, no one was threatened. The defendant repeatedly entered private property without permission, and my client responded with light, water, and signage. This wasn't retaliation, it was protection. The judge nodded slowly, then turned to Corinne. "Did you believe you had permission to use the plaintiff's pool?" Corinne hesitated. "I thought, yes or no, ma'am." Her lips trembled. "No." That one word changed everything. The ruling wasn't grand or cinematic, no slammed gavels or shouting matches. Just a calm statement. The defendant trespassed repeatedly. The plaintiff's actions were nonviolent and protective. Case dismissed. Costs covered by the defendant. It was justice in black ink, simple and quiet. But the real victory wasn't the ruling, it was the look on Corinne's face as she realized her story had finally lost its power. Walking out of that courthouse, the rain had stopped. The pavement shimmered under the streetlights like the surface of my pool. I didn't feel triumph. I felt relief. And maybe sadness. Because no one truly wins in neighbor wars. You just learn how to draw your lines deeper. When I got home that night, I stood by the pool again, the same place where all this had started. The water was calm, still, and perfect. I took a breath, letting the reflection of the porch light ripple with the faint wind. I whispered to myself, "It's over." But deep down, I knew it was, because in stories like this, peace is never permanent. And Karen. She wasn't the kind of person who faded quietly. Would you have felt vindicated or guilty for pushing it this far? Tell me in the comments. And make sure to subscribe because in the next part, Karen's revenge won't come through trespassing. It'll come through the HOA itself. You'd think after a court ruling, after public humiliation, after watching your own actions dissected on a courtroom screen that anyone would just stop. But not Karen. For her, defeat wasn't an ending, it was a dare. A few quiet weeks passed after the hearing. The neighborhood calmed. Kids rode bikes again, sprinklers hissed in the evenings, and the echo of gossip seemed to fade into the background hum of suburban life. I thought maybe, finally, peace had returned. Then one morning I found a new HOA newsletter in my mailbox. It had the usual bits: community barbecue date, recycling reminders, grass height rules, and then, tucked neatly in the middle column, one small paragraph that made my stomach drop. Effective immediately, the HOA will be reviewing property modifications, including lighting, signage, and outdoor safety systems. All residents must submit compliance forms by the end of the month. It looked innocent, bureaucratic even, but I knew exactly what it was. Karen had found a new weapon: paperwork. I didn't even need to ask how. Word traveled fast. She'd been volunteering with the HOA for months, attending meetings, helping with newsletters, pretending to be concerned about safety and community cohesion. In reality, she'd been planting seeds. Neighbors who used to glare at her were now quoting her. "She's right, you know," one said at the mailbox. "All those warning lights and cameras, they make the neighborhood look paranoid." That stung. I'd been the one defending the safety of this place. Now I was being painted as the problem. By the following week, I received an official notice. The HOA wanted to inspect my backyard setup. They cited unapproved modifications, meaning the floodlights, cameras, and even the motion sensors I'd installed for protection. In short, they wanted my defenses gone. I walked into the inspection meeting ready for another argument, but the tone was different this time. Marlene, the HOA president, was polite but distant. A man I didn't recognize, apparently the new safety committee chair, was sitting beside her. And then right behind them was Karen, pretending to take notes like she was just another community volunteer. Her smugness was almost artistic. "Thank you for coming," Marlene began. "We've received multiple concerns about your property modifications. While we understand your reasons, some members feel the equipment is excessive for a residential neighborhood." I kept my voice steady. "Excessive? You mean the cameras that caught a trespasser, the same ones that helped the police close a case?" Karen didn't even look up from her notepad. "No one's questioning that," she said sweetly. "We're just trying to maintain a friendly aesthetic, you know, to keep things inviting." Inviting. The word nearly made me laugh. I turned toward her. "Karen, with all due respect, the last time I made things inviting, you used it as an open invitation." Her eyes flickered, that sharp moment when fake calm slips for half a second, but she recovered fast. "We're just following HOA protocol," she said. "Nothing personal." It was personal, everyone knew it. Still, rules are rules, and the HOA, bless their bureaucracy, decided to fine me for unapproved installations. Not much, a few $100s, but it was the principle that stung. The same cameras that protected me were now violations. That night I sat on my porch, the notice in my hands, staring out at the faint reflection of the pool. The water rippled quietly, lit by the same lights they now wanted me to remove. My first instinct was anger. My second was exhaustion. But my third, that one was focus. Because if Karen was going to play politics, I'd play documentation. Again, over the next few days, I started collecting everything. Emails from the HOA, copies of the newsletter, screenshots of Karen's posts about rebuilding community trust. I noticed something interesting. Every new rule seemed to align with complaints she'd personally raised. The lights, the cameras, even the security sign near my fence. She wasn't just influencing the HOA, she was the HOA from the shadows. And she wasn't done. A few days later, I got an email from a neighbor I barely knew, someone who'd recently joined one of her little coffee circles. He wrote, "Hey, just a heads up. Karen's been saying you violated HOA policy by using footage of residents without permission. She's trying to get a vote to ban personal security cameras facing shared areas." I read it 3 times. Then my hands started shaking, not with fear this time, but with disbelief. She was trying to ban cameras. The same cameras that had proven her guilt. That week, the HOA announced an emergency vote on privacy regulations. I knew I couldn't sit quietly anymore. At the next meeting, I showed up early. Karen was already there, surrounded by her new circle of supporters. She smiled when she saw me, the kind of smile that says checkmate. When the discussion started, she took the floor. "This isn't about one person," she said smoothly. "This is about protecting everyone's privacy. Cameras facing shared spaces are invasive. They create division." She had them nodding. Even Marlene looked uncertain. Then it was my turn. I stood up, hands shaking, not from nerves, but from anger barely contained. "Let us be clear," I said. "Those cameras didn't create division, they revealed it." You could have heard a pin drop. I turned toward the crowd, locking eyes with every neighbor I could. "The only reason we're talking about privacy now is because someone got caught breaking it. If you let this pass, you're not protecting the neighborhood, you're protecting trespassers." The silence stretched. Corinne's smile faltered just a little. Then a voice from the back, Tom, the retired firefighter, spoke up. "He's right, I saw that footage. Those cameras protected us. They're not the problem." And just like that, the room shifted. The vote didn't pass. Corinne lost, again. But as people filed out, she caught my gaze, and for the first time, her smile wasn't smug. It was something colder. Controlled, like she'd already moved on to the next step. She leaned close as she passed me and whispered, low enough that only I could hear, "You can win the battles, but I'll win the neighborhood." I froze because the way she said it didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a promise. When I got home that night, I looked out over the pool again, the reflection trembling with the breeze. It wasn't about trespassing anymore. It was about power, control, image. And in a neighborhood like ours, image was everything. What would you do at this point? Move away or stand your ground? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to see how Corinne's next move nearly cost me my home, make sure you're subscribed. Because part 6 is where the war gets personal. After that HOA meeting, I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. The vote had failed, the cameras stayed, and for once, truth had actually stood taller than gossip. But with Corinne, peace was never peace. It was just the calm before another storm. It started small, as it always does. A strange car idling outside my driveway at night. Anonymous complaints about my lawn being too long. Notices about unsightly trash bins, even though I'd tucked them neatly away. Each day a new letter, a new warning, a new excuse. I'd pick them up, read them, and laugh at first. She's desperate, I told myself. She's just trying to get under your skin. But when I received a certified envelope stamped final violation, possible fines pending, the laughter stopped cold. Inside were photos, printed, time-stamped, and highlighted of my backyard. The very same angles only someone standing inside my property could have taken. That's when I realized she'd found a way in again. I walked straight to the HOA office the next morning. Marlene, the president, looked exhausted. She rubbed her temples when I dropped the envelope on her desk. "This," I said, "is harassment. Look at those pictures. You know who's behind it." Marlene sighed, her voice soft but careful. "I can't prove that, Alex, but you're not the first to get targeted lately. Corinne's been very active. She's hosting neighborhood walkthroughs, saying she's helping maintain standards." "Walkthroughs?" I echoed, jaw tightening. "She's not an HOA official," Marlene nodded weakly. "She's persuasive, some residents trust her, and she's convinced a few to submit complaints anonymously." I took a deep breath, trying not to explode. "So she weaponized the HOA?" Marlene didn't answer, but her silence said enough. That night I sat by my pool again, that quiet blue reflection mocking me. The same water that had once been my sanctuary now felt cursed. Every ripple, every reflection reminded me of her intrusion. I turned off the lights and sat in the dark, my fists clenched. "I'm not letting her take this from me," I whispered. But even as I said it, I knew she wasn't stopping. A few days later, a knock came at my door. It was Corinne this time. It was 2 city inspectors, clipboards in hand. "Sir," one of them said, "we received multiple complaints about electrical hazards on your property. Something about exposed wiring near a pool." My stomach sank. "What? That's absurd. The setup is fully grounded and professionally installed." They gave me a sympathetic look, but still did their job, walking through the yard, taking notes. I could see Corinne watching from across the street, arms folded, pretending to water her flowers. One of the inspectors glanced toward her and whispered, "You've got a neighbor problem, huh?" "Biggest understatement of the year," I muttered. After the inspection, they cleared me, no violations, no hazards, but that didn't matter. The damage was done. The neighbors had seen the city truck outside my house. The rumor mill spun faster than ever. By evening, I overheard snippets through open windows and garden fences. Something about dangerous wiring. I heard his pool's not safe. Wasn't there a court case before? Maybe he's hiding something. Corinne didn't need truth. She just needed noise. And in a perfect suburban community, noise was louder than facts. A few nights later, I saw her again, out by the sidewalk talking to Tom, the retired firefighter who'd once defended me. They laughed. Then she placed a hand on his arm, leaning in with that practiced sympathy. I couldn't hear what she said, but the expression on his face changed, hesitant, uncertain. And right then, something broke in me. I'd been playing defense for too long. It was time to push back. The next morning, I gathered every document, every message, every inspection report. Then I sat down and wrote a detailed complaint to the HOA, attaching proof that Corinne had been harassing residents under the guise of safety checks. But I didn't stop there. I reached out to others she'd targeted, people she'd guilt-tripped over garden decorations, Christmas lights, even driveway chalk drawings. I asked them to share their stories, and to my surprise, they did. Turns out I wasn't the only one fighting her. She'd been policing everyone, nitpicking minor infractions, threatening fines, and making people feel small. And finally, they were ready to talk. We decided to bring it all up at the next HOA meeting. It was a Friday evening. The community center was packed. I could see Karen near the front, dressed neatly, confident, smiling like she already owned the room. She didn't know what was coming. When the floor opened for community concerns, I stood up. "I'd like to address a pattern of harassment within this neighborhood," I began, my voice steady, "and I have documentation to prove it." The murmurs started immediately. Karen tilted her head, feigning confusion. "Harassment? From whom?" I didn't answer with words. I slid a folder onto the table, photos, emails, copies of HOA messages traced back to her committee account. Then I hit play on my tablet, projecting the audio I'd captured just days earlier, her voice, recorded during one of her walkthroughs, mocking residents for not living up to community standards. "Some people just think their pool makes them special," her voice said, dripping with disdain. "They'll learn." The room went silent. Then, like a wave, gasps rippled through the crowd. Karen's face went pale, her confident posture cracked. "That's taken out of context," she stammered. "You can't just—" But Marlene stood up. "That's enough. Karen, I think you should step outside." Karen looked around, but no one met her gaze this time, not even her so-called supporters. For once, her power had evaporated. After the meeting, people approached me quietly. They apologized for believing the rumors, thanked me for standing up, and one even said, "She had us all fooled." As I drove home that night, for the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. But just as I turned onto my street, I saw her. Karen, standing on her lawn, arms crossed, eyes locked on me as I parked. Her lips moved, just barely. "You'll regret this," she mouthed. Then she turned and went inside, and suddenly the peace I'd felt, gone. That night I couldn't sleep. Every creak in the house made me flinch. Every gust of wind over the pool felt like a whisper, because if I knew one thing about Karen, it was that she never let go, and she wasn't done. What would you do if your neighbor swore revenge after being exposed like that? Would you ignore her, or strike first before she does something worse? Tell me in the comments below, and make sure you're subscribed, because in Part 7, Karen's revenge takes a turn so dangerous. It nearly cost me everything. After that HOA meeting, I wanted to believe it was finally over. Karen had been exposed in front of everyone. Her reputation, her influence, her lies, all shattered in one evening. But people like Karen don't just disappear when the light hits them. They slither back into the shadows and wait. For a week, the neighborhood was eerily calm. Too calm, no complaints, no flyers, no anonymous letters. Even Karen's porch lights stayed off, her car gone most evenings. It felt like living in the eye of a storm. I started sleeping again, eating better. Even had a few neighbors over for a small barbecue, a symbolic gesture, like, we've survived the HOA chaos together. Everything seemed normal until that night. It was late, close to midnight. The house was quiet, the street still. I'd fallen asleep on the couch when I heard it, a faint splash. At first, I thought it was a dream, but then I heard it again, louder, my pool. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside through the sliding door. The cold air bit at my skin. Water rippled gently under the moonlight, but what I saw next made my heart pound. A shadow, moving, someone was in the pool. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking through the silence. The figure froze, then darted toward the shallow end. For a moment, all I could see was the water churning, and then as she stood up, the beam of my flashlight caught her face. Karen. Her hair was wet, mascara running down her cheeks, and she was wearing what looked like one of my old pool towels. I couldn't even process it. "Karen, what the hell are you doing?" She didn't answer. She just stared at me, this weird mix of defiance and desperation. Then she said, "You can't stop me. This neighborhood doesn't belong to you." I blinked, stunned. "Karen, you're trespassing again. You broke in. Are you insane?" She stepped closer, dripping water across the deck. "You humiliated me in front of everyone. You think you're the hero, don't you?" I took a cautious step back. "I'm not the hero. I just wanted peace." "But you," she cut me off, her voice trembling. "You ruined my life, Alex." That's when I noticed it. In her other hand, something metallic glinted in the moonlight. A screwdriver. I froze. For a split second, I didn't breathe. The pool pump hummed softly behind her, the sound suddenly deafening. "Karen," I said quietly, raising my hands. "Put that down. Let's talk, okay?" She took another step forward, shaking. "You put cameras on me. You made everyone hate me." "I just wanted to feel safe, too." My heart was racing now. "Safe? You're in my backyard with a weapon." And then she lunged. It wasn't fast, but it was enough to make me stumble backward. The flashlight hit the deck, rolling toward the pool. She slipped. Her foot hit the slick tile, and before I could react, she fell hard, half her body crashing into the water, the screwdriver clattering to the ground. For a second, everything went still. Then I heard her scream. Shock from the cold water and maybe from what she'd just done seemed to snap her back to reality. She crawled out, soaked, gasping, her face twisted in fear and humiliation. The noise had drawn attention. Within minutes, porch lights flicked on across the street. Curtains moved. Someone shouted, "What's going on?" Then came the red and blue lights. A neighbor had called 911. When the police arrived, Karen was sitting on the edge of the deck, shivering, wrapped in the same towel she'd stolen before. Her eyes were empty. One of the officers, a tall man with a calm voice, pulled me aside. "You want to tell me what happened here?" I took a breath, my voice shaking. "She broke in again. I caught her swimming in my pool with that." I pointed to the screwdriver. The officer picked it up carefully. "Any idea what she planned to do with it?" I shook my head. "No, but she wasn't right. She said I ruined her life." He nodded slowly. "We'll take it from here." Karen was handcuffed and led to the cruiser. But as they guided her toward the car, she turned her head toward me. Her expression wasn't anger anymore. It was emptiness. Like she'd finally run out of fight. She said quietly, almost to herself, "You'll see, Alex, everyone leaves eventually." Then the door shut and the car pulled away into the night. The neighborhood woke up early the next morning to the sound of gossip again. Only this time, the story was different. She broke into his yard with a weapon. She's gone too far this time. For once, no one defended her. Marlene stopped by later that day. "We've issued a formal removal notice. Karen's no longer part of the HOA committee. The board voted unanimously." I didn't even feel victory, just relief and sadness. Because even though she'd tormented me for months, I couldn't shake the image of her sitting there, drenched, shaking, whispering to herself. That night, I stood by the pool again. The water was still, peaceful, but it didn't feel like a victory. It felt like the end of something broken, like two neighbors who could have just lived in peace but turned their lives into a battlefield. I looked up at the stars and exhaled. "It's finally over," I whispered. But somewhere deep down, I wasn't sure I believed it. If someone like Karen pushed you that far, if they broke in, tried to hurt you, then fell apart, what would you do next? Would you press charges or finally let it go? Tell me what you think in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed, because in Part 8, the aftermath takes a darker twist when the truth about why Karen lost control finally comes out. The night Karen was arrested, I didn't sleep. The image of her drenched, shaking, whispering those final words kept replaying in my head. "You'll see, Alex, everyone leaves eventually." At first, I thought it was just her usual cryptic nonsense. Another mind game, but as the hours passed, something inside me shifted. There was something different in her tone that night. It wasn't venom, it was grief. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I found myself wondering why. A few days later, the neighborhood was buzzing again, but this time no one was defending Karen. No one was whispering about me being paranoid or controlling. Now all eyes were on her. The police had charged her with trespassing, harassment, and attempted assault. The HOA removed her from every committee. Her house, once immaculate and bright with seasonal decorations, now sat dark and silent. And yet something about it didn't feel satisfying. The victory felt hollow. Marlene stopped by one afternoon with a clipboard. She looked tired, older almost. "She's gone, you know," she said softly. "Gone. She moved out this morning, police supervised. Her son helped pack up the last of her things. The house is up for sale." I nodded slowly, staring past her toward the empty windows across the street. Marlene hesitated. "She wasn't always like that. Before you moved here, she used to host block parties, Christmas potlucks. She cared about this neighborhood more than anyone, but something changed after her husband left." That caught me off guard. "Her husband," Marlene sighed. "Yeah, he left 2 years ago, ran off with someone else. After that, she started throwing herself into HOA work. Control became her way of coping." Control. That word hit harder than I expected. Later that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. All those times she invaded my space, demanded authority, crossed lines, it wasn't just about power. It was about loss. Still, sympathy doesn't erase damage. But when I looked at her dark, empty house, I didn't feel anger anymore, just exhaustion and maybe a strange kind of pity. A few days later, I got an envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name written in messy handwriting. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a single photo. The photo was old, maybe 5 or 6 years. Karen and her husband standing by the same pool fence that divided our properties. They were smiling, happy. She was wearing the same robe I'd seen her in that first night she trespassed. On the paper, there was just one line written. "It used to be ours, too." My stomach tightened. I looked at the photo again, really looked at it this time. The fence, it was different back then. Lower, shared. No clear boundary. Maybe once upon a time this had been an open yard between their homes. Then after the divorce, the line was redrawn, literally and emotionally. Maybe that's why she kept sneaking back in. Maybe in her own twisted way, she was trying to reclaim something she'd lost, not just control, but memories. That night, I stood by my pool again, staring at the reflection of her house in the still water. The same house that once echoed with arguments, laughter, and the sound of a family falling apart. It hit me then maybe Karen wasn't the villain I thought she was. Maybe she was just broken. People don't start wars like that unless they're trying to fill a void. A few weeks passed and the neighborhood slowly moved on. The Karen saga, as people half-jokingly called it, became local legend. But I couldn't let it rest. I needed closure for both of us. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I drove to the small rental home address the police had on record, the one she'd moved into after the incident. I didn't even know what I was going to say. Apology, goodbye, maybe just acknowledgement, but when I knocked, no one answered. The blinds were drawn, the windows dusty. The mailbox was overflowing. A neighbor passing by said quietly, "She moved again," didn't say where, just disappeared. On the drive home, the radio played softly and my thoughts wandered. Had she finally left to start over? Or had she just given up entirely? I'd probably never know. When I got home, the sun was setting, golden light bouncing off the pool's surface. For the first time in months, the water looked peaceful. No ripples, no reflection of chaos, just calm. I whispered to the still air, "I hope you find peace, Karen, wherever you are." And then, almost symbolically, the wind picked up, scattering a few old HOA flyers from my porch into the pool. They floated there for a second before sinking slowly under the surface. Just like the past, gone but not forgotten. Sometimes revenge stories don't end with grand justice or perfect karma. Sometimes they end with understanding. Because behind every Karen, there's usually a reason, a story of control, pain, or loneliness that nobody bothered to see. And while I'll never forgive her for what she did, I also can't hate her anymore. She was her own punishment all along. What do you think? Was Karen a villain or a victim of her own life falling apart? Would you forgive her, or would you still press charges to make sure she never returns? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe because Part 9, the final part, brings a shocking twist when Karen's story comes full circle in the most unexpected way. Months had passed since Karen disappeared. The neighborhood returned to a semblance of calm. Kids played freely again, sprinklers danced in the sunlight, and the only reminder of the chaos she caused was the faint outline of a once battleground pool area that now shimmered peacefully. I thought the story was over, truly over. Then one rainy afternoon, I received a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name scrawled across the front in hurried handwriting. Inside was a small envelope with a folded piece of paper. I opened it carefully. There was a note. "I never meant for it to go this far. I hope you're safe. Kay," and beneath it, a photograph. It was a picture of her from years ago, long before the HOA drama, before the trespassing, before the police, before the chaos. She was at a community event, smiling genuinely, a younger version of herself, hand in hand with a little boy. I froze. That little boy, the way he looked at the camera, the same mischievous eyes, felt strangely familiar. Then it hit me. A memory I hadn't considered before. The tiny boy I had once helped at the pool years ago when a toddler had fallen in the shallow end and I had dived in to save him. Could it be? I pulled out my old photo albums, scanned the old neighborhood newsletters, and there it was, her son. The same little boy who had been present in those innocent moments long before the feud began. The realization shook me. The chaos I'd lived through, the trespassing, the sabotage, the HOA battles, had begun with a family in pain. A woman struggling to keep control of the one thing she felt she had left, her child. Karen's villainy suddenly made a haunting kind of sense. She hadn't just been a selfish neighbor. She had been a mother trying in her own broken way to protect what she could. I stood by my pool that evening, the wind stirring ripples across the water. It was quiet now, calm, reflective. I realized that moral justice had played out, yes, but human emotion was messy. Pain and fear often masquerade as anger. Pride can look like entitlement. And sometimes the hardest battles we fight aren't against our neighbors, but against the past, both theirs and ours. Days later, I received another note, this time with an apology and a promise. Karen had entered therapy, was moving forward, and was working on rebuilding her life away from the neighborhood. It was bittersweet. The fear, the anger, the sleepless nights, they were all gone, but the lessons remained. I looked at my pool, shimmering under the moonlight. The water reflected the house, the fence, the yard, and for the first time it reflected peace. The neighborhood was intact, the HOA calmer, and I had grown stronger not just by defending my property, but by learning empathy, patience, and the complicated shades of human behavior. And as I stood there, a thought crossed my mind. Perhaps the most important justice isn't legal or moral. It's emotional. The ability to survive chaos, to maintain integrity, and to forgive, even if only for your own peace of mind. I smiled, whispered to the night, "Goodbye, Karen. I hope you finally find your peace." The wind stirred the pool again, and for the first time in months, it didn't feel like a battlefield. It felt like a home. So what do you think? Was Karen a villain, a victim, or just a broken person caught in her own storms? Would you have handled it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments and make sure you subscribe for more stories where justice, drama, and human emotion collide. Because sometimes the truth is far more complicated than we ever imagined, and sometimes peace comes not from winning the war, but from understanding the battle. He won the game not by being the fastest or the loudest, but by being the most patient and letting his enemy overplay their hand. But even after all this, the question remains, are there more people like Randall Thorne out there? And is the corruption truly over?